Hello, I'm Michael Woods. Here is a quick screencast about a presentation that I gave at the Danish Greenkeepers Conference in November 2025. I've shared the slides, but now I would like to narrate this and explain what I talked about in a presentation that I called A Complete Philosophy of Turfgrass Nutrition. I've been having some recent conversations about this, and I think it is interesting to explain what I'm thinking now in terms of the philosophy of turfgrass nutrition. I started off with this quote from John Madison from his excellent book, Principles of Turfgrass Culture. That was published in 1971, and he said that fertilizer is the #1 management tool. It is worth all the attention you can give it. And so I asked everybody in the audience for the next 45 minutes or so to please bear with me, and we'll give all of our attention to this particular topic and make sure that we get it right. The idea is that once we can get it right, we can just put nutrition on cruise control. In fact, back in 2014, I gave a presentation at Oregon State University, and the title of that presentation, which was a guest lecture appearance in their Hort 314 Principles of Turfgrass Maintenance course, the title of that was Everything You Need to Know About Turfgrass Nutrition in One Lecture. But the first slide that I showed said that we could really just talk about this in 1 minute. And we could just say, apply the right amount of nitrogen, ensure the pH is between 5.5 and less, in between 5.5 and 8.3, make sure you have enough potassium, make sure you have enough phosphorus. And I gave specific soil levels that I'm sure are going to be enough. So if you do that in 1 minute, you've handled turfgrass nutrition. But we can go a little bit deeper and think about this in even more specific terms and just make sure that we cover everything, because the 1 minute version seems a little bit too simple for some people. So let's go through 4 principles. The 4 principles that I explained was that we get better conditions when we have slow growing grass. Now, that might not be what we're looking for horse racing surfaces. It might not be what we're looking for sporting surfaces, for say football or baseball or cricket outfields. The point is we need to match our nutrient supply to how much the grass is growing. So for golf, we want slow growing grass. For other turf, we want the grass to grow at the right rate. So what we need to do is match the nutrient supply to the rate. So the same philosophy applies, but because this was an audience of greenkeepers, we talked about golf examples. And I showed a picture from the 2010 Open Championship at the old course at St. Andrews. And I asked the question, is this turf going to have better playing conditions if we increase the growth rate? And the answer is no. The reason why those conditions are so good is because the growth is slow. That's what allows the ball to bounce and roll across the surface in the desired way. So for golf, we're always trying to make the grass grow slower. We're trying to reduce the growth rate in many, many instances. I showed this picture from Augusta National. This is from behind the 9th green, looking up the 9th fairway, and to the right side, you can see the main scoreboard, and then you can see the first fairway and the first green in the distance going up that hill. And the question, again, are these surfaces going to be better if we increase the growth rate? And the answer is no. Once we have 100% grass cover, once we have grass that covers the ground, and it covers the ground with enough thickness, enough density of leaves, enough leaves per square centimeter. Once we have that, we don't get improved conditions by increasing the growth rate. We get improved conditions by growing the grass slower. And when the grass grows slower, it actually uses less nutrients. And it's important to remember that. And this is nothing new. The famous architect, Alistair Mackenzie, he wrote in his in an essay that is in his collection of essays in a book called Spirit of St. Andrews. I don't know when this was originally written. Maybe one of you watching this can tell me, but I suppose from the 1920s or early 1930s. The quote is, "The fundamental principle of successful greenkeeping is the recognition of the fact that the finest golfing grasses flourish on poor soil and that more harm is done by over rather than under fertilizing." And this goes back to those two images I showed before, one from a links course, one from Augusta National, and the surfaces are excellent, producing world-class conditions at both. But the point is, we don't get better conditions. Once we have surfaces like that, we don't get better conditions by growing the grass faster. We get better conditions by either maintaining the slow growth rate or reducing the growth rate from what we have. So what we want to do as professional turfgrass managers is make sure that the grass is supplied with enough nutrients. We don't want deficiencies. We don't want to have the grass to not have enough phosphorus. We don't want the grass to run out of potassium. We don't want the grass to run out of anything. We want to make sure the grass is supplied with enough. The enough is related to how much the grass is growing. How much the grass is growing tells us how much the grass will use. So one way to solve that problem, to make sure that the grass gets all the nutrients it can use, is simply to apply 100% of what the grass could use as fertilizer. And that is the general concept behind precision fertilization. And this is a method that is published by STURF. It was developed by Tom Erickson and other researchers, and it was first published as a complete handbook in 2011, which I think is really surprising that on one side of the world, or actually, I was in Asia collaborating with Larry and Wendy from Pace Turf, who were in the USA. So we would say we were on a couple sides of the world. Then on another continent entirely in Europe, there was precision fertilization being developed. But at the same time, in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, when we were coming up with the idea that we now call MLSN, in Europe, they were coming up with precision fertilization. And they're basically the same thing. But precision fertilization is saying that you should apply the same dose of fertilizer. Dose is the wrong word. You would change the dose or change the rate, but it's the same composition of fertilizer, the same ratio of nutrients in your fertilizer, with that ratio of nutrients being matched to what the grass will use. So you're putting, let's say, I think I have the numbers here. Yeah. So they're saying that for the grasses in their region, apply for every 100 parts of nitrogen you'd put 65 parts K, 14 parts P, 9 parts of S, 7 parts of calcium, 6 parts magnesium, and so on. They also show micronutrients, but the numbers are quite small, and I'm not going to show it. And then you would adjust this. If you want the grass to grow a little bit faster, and the grass is growing faster, and you need to resupply some of these nutrients, you increase the rate that you apply, but you always apply the nutrients in that proportion. So this just ignores the soil, which I think leads to a potential inefficiency, but it certainly guarantees that you won't have deficiency because you're supplying everything that the grass can use. And then you just supply it in the proper dose to get the desired growth rate. That is what I call precision fertilization. Now, this has been slightly updated recently after they did the SUSFOS project, and they found that you don't always need to apply phosphorus. So now they're saying for precision fertilization, there's an entirely new section in the latest handbook, and it says if your soil test levels are above 18 parts per million Mehlich-3, I think, and are remaining above 18 parts per million Mehlich-3, then you can reduce the amount of phosphorus applied. But I think we can ask the question, like, what if the soil already has enough potassium? What if the soil already has a whole bunch of calcium? Do we really need to mix up the nutrients in that proportion? Do we need to add a complete fertilizer every time we fertilize? And that's where MLSN comes in, because if the grass is getting enough nutrients and the grass is growing well, and if we test the soil and find out that the grass has plenty of magnesium in the soil, plenty of manganese in the soil, plenty of potassium in the soil, then do we really need to mix up a fertilizer that contains manganese and potassium and everything? Or should we just apply what is low in the soil? Again, that's where MLSN comes in. And that was part 3 of this, where we can do what I recommend. What I recommend is make sure that the grass is supplied with 100% of the nutrients that it can use. But we don't insist that those nutrients come from fertilizer only. We recognize that some of those nutrients or all of those nutrients may be able to be supplied by the soil. So we allow the soil and the fertilizer that we apply to supply all the nutrients that the grass can use. And I then explained that I like to use MLSN for this. That stands for Minimum Levels for Sustainable Nutrition. And this was a presentation given in Denmark, so I showed this particular slide in Danish. And what it is a modern method for soil test interpretation and fertilizer recommendations for turfgrass. It's a modern method because it's based on the way grass is managed today. It's based on the soils that grass is growing in today. It's based on the varieties of grass that are used for fine turfgrass areas today. This is an example of a decade-long soil test timeline from a golf course. This is from a golf course putting green in Japan. And what we want to do using MLSN is simply keep above the minimum value, which is 37. If we keep above the minimum value, which is currently 37 parts per million by the Mehlich 3 test, we can be very confident that the grass will be supplied with enough, because there's this buffer, this 37 parts per million in the soil that the grass will never touch. When the soil, what it means when we say that we stay above 37 parts per million, what that means is that the grass never touches it. It means there's always that extra amount of potassium in the soil that the grass never touches. And so we do that, and you end up applying small amounts of fertilizer. As it gets down closer to that minimum level, you may apply a little bit more. And then when you get up somewhat above that minimum level, like at 60 parts per million or 55 parts per million, then you let it drop down a little bit, and you're constantly adjusting the amount applied. You end up applying just enough to make sure that the grass is not going to have a deficiency. Now with phosphorus, it can work a little bit differently, because phosphorus is used in smaller quantities by the grass, and yet the soil will hold the phosphorus. Phosphorus is less mobile in the soil. So if a site has a history of being fertilized with more phosphorus than the grass can use, then you will have a soil that may have many, many years worth of plant available phosphorus that's there and that can be used. So this is that same site in Japan. I think it's the same site. Yeah, the testing dates are identical. So it's that same site. Started off in 2012 with an average of 61 parts per million, which is a few years supply. And so no phosphorus was applied for a few years until it dropped down to 40 parts per million. And then a little bit of phosphorus was supplied, and it bumped up to 48 parts per million. Then no phosphorus was applied again until it dropped down to 29 parts per million, which is just above the MLSN guideline. And then the rate of phosphorus applied is recommended to match the plant use. And what you may realize now, and in fact, this is a conversation I just had with a friend this morning, what you may realize by now, and of course I explained this when I was giving this presentation live a couple weeks ago in Denmark, is after a while, after you've applied the MLSN method for a while and allowed the grass to use the extra nutrients that are in the soil, the MLSN method converges to be exactly the same as the precision fertilization method. So after a while, after all the extra calcium in the soil is used, after all the extra plant available phosphorus in the soil is used, after all the extra plant available potassium in the soil is used, the MLSN method will end up making a recommendation that is practically identical to the precision fertilization method, because we're still trying to keep that untouched amount in the soil, which is what the MLSN value represents. That's the value that we never want to touch. And that allows us to put this on cruise control, because it allows us to put the turf nutrition on cruise control, because we are sure that we can get excellent turfgrass conditions when the grass is supplied with all the nutrients that it can use. And we know that the grass that's growing in soils that has that much extra, that it has that MLSN minimum value in the soil, we know that that's enough as extra. And so all we have to do beyond that is just match plant use. So MLSN and precision fertilization eventually converge. Now, practically, they may never, for a lot of elements. For phosphorus and potassium, well, it depends on your soil mineralogy if it will ever converge for potassium. For phosphorus, it likely will if you're harvesting clippings. But the reason why it may not for calcium and magnesium is because a lot of turf areas are irrigated, and irrigation water will often contain more calcium and magnesium than the grass would ever use. So we end up accumulating those elements in the soil. And that's why this is very site specific. And that's why I really like to use the MLSN method to test the soil at our site and figure out what our situation is at our site. And then we make a site specific plan. Precision fertilization works really good, but it ignores the soil. And so there are a number of inefficiencies that are involved when we apply phosphorus, but the soil has enough. When we apply calcium, but the soil has enough. And applying at the rate that the grass will use is not really, by my assessment, that's not over fertilization. It's just unnecessary fertilization. So if we're applying in the amount that the grass will use, what will happen is at the end of the year, we would expect the soil to be at the same level as it was at the start of the year. But if we could have gotten the exact same conditions by omitting the calcium from the fertilizer, if we could have gotten the exact same conditions by omitting the phosphorus from the fertilizer, then it's a little bit inefficient to apply those. So the idea is to eventually get to the point to where all we really need to do is adjust the nitrogen. We can find a site-specific amount of fertilizer to apply for our site based on what's in the soil and based on how much the grass is going to use. So when we do that, then over time, this is from a different site. This is from a golf course in Japan. The phosphorus in the frame at left just stays right above the MLSN minimum, because that golf course superintendent is adjusting the phosphorus rate to just apply the amount that is matching plant use every year, which that is exactly the same as what precision fertilization would be recommending. And with the potassium, we have a timeline where the potassium is slightly going up. From 2021 to 2025, it's gone up from 43 up to 62 parts per million. So that's going up gradually. And in that case, we can see the potassium rate is a little bit higher than what the system is using. So in this case, the next time that they do a soil test, they've already had a recommendation to reduce their potassium rate, and we will see how that reduces, and then we will adjust again based on their site, how the potassium changes in the soil. We will try to get this so it just becomes a flat line. The idea is to just have a flat line for every element, just showing that the amount applied as fertilizer is matching what the system uses. But we don't want that line to be way up here with a huge amount in the soil. We want that again, remember, we don't want the grass to grow extra. We want the grass to be in a situation where we can just adjust the nitrogen rate while still being certain that there's enough potassium, enough phosphorus, enough calcium, enough magnesium, and so on in the soil. So if we try to load up the soil with all these elements, there is a huge potential for environmental loss, a huge potential for waste, and it's just completely useless to build up a really, really rich soil full of nutrients. That's not what we want for most high performance turfgrass surfaces. We want slow growing grass. We want to have 100% of the nutrients supplied as fertilizer. We want the grass to get 100% of the nutrients that it can use. But one way to do that is precision fertilization, which is supplying it all as fertilizer. My recommendation, though, is to use MLSN, which evaluates the soil at a site. And if the soil has enough, we don't apply it as fertilizer. If the soil doesn't have enough, then we do apply that element as fertilizer. So it works out that we have 100% of the nutrients are supplied, but we allow that the soil can supply some of that. And we eventually get, when we apply these methods, we get to the point where it really is on cruise control, because the only thing that we need to adjust is nitrogen. We can be 100% certain that the grass is getting 100% of every single nutrient that it could possibly use. And I closed by the beer analogy, which I've told before, and I'll say this really quick for those of you who haven't heard it. So the way the beer analogy works is, I'm going to have a party. Let's say that we're going to watch a football game on Friday night. I invite 4 friends to come over to my house, and I say, please bring some snacks. Maybe, order a couple pizzas or some potato chips, but don't worry about beer. I'll take care of the beer. So the question that I have is, how many beers do I need to buy? And this is not something that we need a spreadsheet for. This is not something I need to go to an MLSN seminar. I don't need to go to a seminar about learning how to buy beer, learning how many beers I need to buy. This is something that we easily solve in our head without even thinking about it. And the thought process, the logic that we use to figure out how many beers to buy is exactly the same process that we can apply to fertilize turf. So it goes like this. I've invited 4 friends over. We're going to watch a football game. I told them I don't want them to worry about beer. I'll handle the beer, and they can just, maybe order some food, bring some chips, whatever. So I'm going to think, how, for a football game, let's say it's an American football game. So maybe it's going to last like 3 hours, and I'm the host, and I told them not to bring beer. So it's me plus 4 friends. So let's say maybe we're each going to have about 5 beers over the course of 3 hours. That sounds reasonable. So that would be 25 beers. But actually, that's not the number that I'm going to buy, because what if the game goes to overtime and there's extra time? Or what if one of the friends brings somebody who actually wasn't really invited, but it's also our friend? And what if it turns out that there's 6 people here? And also there's the thing of, I really don't want it to be the 4th quarter and then we've only got 4 beers left, and then suddenly they're looking at it going, hey, Micah, you're the host. You told us don't bring beer. You're supposed to have enough, but now it looks like we might run out. Or we don't want to get to halftime and we've already drank 15 beers. There's only 10 left, and the guys are looking going, hey, it's halftime. Should I run to the store or walk to the store and get some more beer? To make sure that we don't run out. That would be kind of embarrassing to me as a host. So actually, I want to have some extra beers. And you'll notice some of these words that we're using, like enough and extra and run out, are some of the same words that we use when we're talking about nutrient supply to grass, or talking about how we might do fertilizer. So realistically, I expect we're going to drink 25 beers, but I want to have some extra beers that I fully expect we're not going to drink. I fully expect that we're never going to touch those beers, but I want to have them so that it makes me look like a good host and so that we can dip into those beers if we have the special situation of overtime or the special situation of another friend coming over unexpected or something like that. Okay. So now I have to think, what's a reasonable number of extra beers to have? And I think in this case, I'm just imagining maybe 20. Maybe 20 would be fine because I want my friends to feel like there's plenty. They don't even have to think about us possibly running out. So in this case, I want to have the amount we will use, which is 25. My estimate of use is 25. The amount that I want to keep in reserve is 20. So the amount that we need is 45. I need 45 beers. Again, you've never had to take a seminar to do this. You just can figure it out on your own. And I'm applying the exact same logic, and it works for turfgrass nutrition and soil tests. Now, the next thing to consider, we're not done yet. The next thing to consider, in addition to the 45 beers, is how many do I need to buy at the store? And that's another question, because if I have 0 right now, then I need to buy 45 at the store. But what if I had a party the last weekend and I have a refrigerator in the garage and I have 50 beers left over in that refrigerator in the garage? Well, if I have 50, then I actually don't need to buy any at the store. If I only have 10 beers in that refrigerator, then I'd need to buy 35 beers at the store. So the number of beers that I have in my extra refrigerator in the garage, those represent the soil test value. Those represent the amount that I have in the soil right now. And then the amount that I'm expecting us to drink, those 25 beers that I expect me and my friends to drink at the party, as we watch the football game, that's the amount that we would expect the grass to use over the course of the year, or that it's the equivalent, right? I'm trying to make an analogy or make some equivalence between certain amounts of beer, certain numbers of beers, and certain amounts of nutrients, certain quantities of nutrients in the soil or as fertilizer. And those 20 extras, remember I said I expect us to drink 25, but have 20 extras that I want to have on hand, and I don't want to touch them, and I don't expect we'll touch them, but just in case we need to dip into those, I want to make sure we don't run out. Those 20 represent the MLSN value. The MLSN value represents a quantity of nutrients. It's a physical quantity of nutrients. That's what parts per million are. They're a mass of nutrients that are in the soil. It's 37 parts per million is 37 milligrams of a nutrient. That's a mass. That's a quantity. It's a weight of nutrients per kilogram of soil. It's a physical amount. Just like 20 beers are a physical amount of beer, 37 parts per million is a physical amount of potassium. And 37 parts per million potassium is an amount that we never have to touch. If we keep the soil at that level or above, we never touch it. So we never have to worry about it. Just like if I have those 20 extra beers, I can watch the game and relax and never have to worry that we might go drink 26 beers, 27 beers, 28 beers. There's still enough for all of us to have There's 5 of us. We can all have 4 more beers. And I know we're not going to have that many. So that's the beer analogy. And then the amount of fertilizer that we need to apply represents, after we've taken into account how many we have on hand. How many we have on hand is our soil test value. So what you do is you take the amount that we expect to use and we add to that the amount that we want to keep in reserve, and then we subtract the amount that we have on hand. And we do that in our head without ever taking a seminar, without pulling out a calculator. We just do that. So that's the beer analogy. If you haven't heard it before, I hope that helps you understand how this all works. And if you want to do any testing, if you want to have your soil test interpreted in this way and see how many nutrients in a site-specific way should be applied at your site, you can get information about that at asianturfgrass.com and at paceturf.org. And the QR code right here is going to a website that has this presentation available for download. So you can get those slides in a PDF format available for download. I hope this was interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.